Hello, family. This is African Esquire, and I'm here with the brothers from the Federation of African Liberation. This is our soapbox live stream, our chance to talk to the people about different issues that are going on. So just briefly, I'm just going to have all of us introduce ourselves. So again, African Esquire, I'm the Minister of Liberation for African Children in this organization. And just guys, remember, whenever one person is talking, to just mute your mic. You can introduce yourselves, whoever wants to go next.
Okay, I can go next. My name is Frank Mauba, member of FAL. I serve on the Ministry of Mental Health for African Youth Children.
PRX out of Chicago, Minister of Self-Defense.
And I'm Dwayne, Minister of Information.
All right, so we have a couple topics we want to talk about, different things that are going on in the diaspora this week. So I'm going to introduce the first topic, and we're going to talk about Ghana. So if many of you don't know, Ghana does have a policy of right to abode to African descendants of the American slave trade. At the same time, while this seems to be like a forward-thinking policy, there are also issues going on in countries like Ghana with U.S. imperialism. For example, there's the military base there. So what are your opinions on what is going on as far as both the right to abode, but also having the dynamic of having a U.S. military base based inside of the country of Ghana?
I guess I'll go first. Well, yeah, I looked into this a bit. Like I love the idea of the right to abode and the fact that they actually put it in the law books that Africans in a diaspora of African descent actually legally has a right to to live and reside in Ghana. But I don't know if it's very revolutionary. It seems more like a place like just like if you're going to retire and you just wanted to go there and settle there from this what I read about it. I think they said about 3,000 people from the diaspora had like taken advantage of it. I mean, I'm worried by well, they're not saying it's a military base, but as we know throughout history, it seems as if it might turn into a U.S. military base in Ghana. I just personally would love to try to take advantage of something like this, but I also feel like, as Africans in a whole, we have to start, rebelling against imperialism instead of continuously, even entertaining it. Like I've read a little bit. I just wanted to read what the government statement was. If I could find it real quick. Can you hear me all right? Or should I talk louder?
You're good.
If I could find it, it said, where is it? Okay, yes, no. Okay, so it says that basically these were the terms that was introduced. Basically, the U.S. military offered the Ghana government. It says they'll be allowed to set up telecommunication system on Ghana's radio spectrum for free. Ghanaian authorities will also be restricted from accessing the facilities given to the U.S. officials when they begin using them. So they won't know anything of what they're saying or what's going on at all. Complete privacy. With suggesting that signing the agreement will mean ceding Ghana's sovereignty to America. The U.S. ambassador to Ghana, Robert Jackson, said the presence of troops must not be seen as an invasion. Okay, they said that the amount of troops, last article I found was like July 28th. They said it was still at least 800 troops in Ghana. That's in 2008. I'm sorry, that's July 28th of this year. Also, it says that, I'm trying to find how much so $20 million will be invested into Indian armed forces for 1 year in 2018, which was basically the return uh, that they were going to get if they made the investment. So I couldn't find a lot of information about what's going on right now. Like, this was a while back. Like, it was a lot of protests, and I think that because of that, it kind of like it wasn't as big as it was going to be, as they planned it to be. But there's still at least what, I think it's 800 troops, and they're still there. So it it seems like a military base is coming, if not already formed. So I mean, I don't know, like me, like I just feel like that's kind of counterproductive. I don't know what your opinions on that would be. Anybody can take over.
It's interesting with the. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to go, Frank?
No, go ahead.
It's interesting with the base. So, I have my husband, and many of you know he's from Ghana, and so he has family over there who we communicate with. So it's interesting when this was happening. We were talking to one of his family members who were kind of laughing because there was a lot of protests whenever this story was made public, and he's laughing like, don't they know that this has always been happening? And that's actually very true. So I want to make sure I have his name. I believe the Ghanaian president is Kofi Ofuo. And what happened is this is actually a deal that existed from the previous administration, the previous presidential administration. So this new administration, Kofi Ofuo, he's more, I think he wants to do more right by the Ghanaian people compared to other politicians. If you see him, he does a lot of things that try to actually engage the public. He tries to stay away from certain things of corruption. He actually doesn't mind speaking out directly against, for example, the French president. He's a lot more forward thinking than a lot of African leaders. So for him, this deal was already in existence from the previous administration. The previous administration had kept this deal a secret. So his thinking was, well, this is something that should be voted on by the Ghanaian parliament. So he actually put it to parliament for them to vote on it, and parliament still passed the bill. So it's interesting that this was actually him trying to do something, I guess, have the people vote on it more so. However, a lot of people were still outraged by this. So that just shows that a lot of these deals are being done behind closed doors. No one ever knows about it. And instead, what you do is you wake up in the morning, you see a U.S. military base, right across the street from you. You never know why it happened. So, Frank, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in quick, like the U.S. military base in Ghana, and not only in Ghana but Africa. Let me just go back to history a little bit. That was the plan of the U.S. before, to control Africa in 1820, when they had the ACA, the American Colonization Society. That is another whole long history, but I will not get into that today. Maybe that could be another time, about Liberia, about transferring free slave back to Liberia. It sounds nice on paper, but it's not as it was like free slave back to Africa. There was not, it was not an ACS mission. The ACS mission was to control Africa in the interest of America. That was the ACS mission. I have done a lot of research on that, and even I did a presentation on that during my undergraduate year. But that will be another topic for another time. So what the US is doing right now, the US is just going back to bring 8-0 policy from controlling Africa. That's what the US is doing right now. But I don't want to say anything that the U.S. presence in Africa or in Ghana should be the cause that will instill fear into Africans who want to go back home. That should even be the cause. But the reality here is, as the U.S. base being in Africa, their initial plan maybe like for business issue or whatsoever. But as time go by, their plan will begin to change based on competition. And you gotta get in mind that when it comes to the capitalists, they are not institutions that love competition. Capitalism, they don't like competition. They like for them to be in control. So when they see that, whenever they see the needs of people coming to compete with them, it become a problem for them. You see, so but the whole military issue based in Ghana, like African Esquire said, they have been there for so long. They have been there when Kofi Annan, not Kofi Annan, but J.A. Kofo. When J.A. Kofo was in power, he initiated this problem also. And then after he died, I mean, not he died, but after he left power, the next man that came, John Mahama, he came in and also enforced it. And then after he left, before this guy now, Nana Akufo-Addo, came in to enforce it. So this is something, this is ongoing thing. But the U.S. is in Africa because the U.S. is a nation that always study things ahead. They have experts. So they always see things ahead of time and try to be the first to settle in there before anybody comes. So before other people come in, they have already get a full understanding of how things it is that there. So even before the 1884 Berlin Conference, before the European went to Africa, America was already there in the 1820s when that whole ACS issue came out. So that's why I say it's a whole different level. So America always want to be the first to be into something before anybody come into it. So right now, the only fear is that you don't go back into history. You know, Cameroon, we see Cameroon right now. You know, like I said, America is in Africa. Their plan may change. But Cameroon is a two-sided people like the French and the English. And the reason why that came was because during how they call it 1884 after 1884 conference, Germany was the one in control of Cameroon, the German. But it came a time the French and the British, true, like the French and the British, they wanted to have they have like a huge influence in Cameroon. So how they could do that was to get together. So they got together and they defeated the German army. And that's how they took over Cameroon. And that's how today you see one side of French and one side of English. And then the French people took about 80% of the land. And that's why you see more French. And then 20% the English. And that's why you see less English. So it's the same thing that we might be expecting on the continent. So America know that. America already finished doing her research or whatsoever. And she know that maybe let's just say 20 years from now, all these superpower will be declining. For example, I can tell you, even the UN we're talking about, the UN is not going to stay. The UN is going to decline. So America already know that the UN is going to decline. So before the UN decline, they have to have a stronghold that when the UN decline, they will still be on top of the world. We saw the UN summit they just had recently. Russia wasn't there and China wasn't there. That is a clear indication that the UN is going to fall. So Russia wasn't there and China wasn't there. And even head of states that came, if you listen to their speeches, you saw they were really hating on America and the British. They're like the Syrian prime minister. You saw his speech. It was all about people interfering into their business. It was all about people going into their country and carrying war there. It was all about supporting terrorists. It was all about supporting Al-Qaeda and all these things. So the war is now hitting on America. So as time go by, other nations will be declining from coming to the UN summit, from coming to the UN session, all those things. And that's how the UN going to disappear. So America already know that. So they are finding a way to find a place, and that place can only be Africa. It can only be Africa that you can control, and that's where all the world mineral resources are. In Iraq right now, they can't get nothing from them. They might be getting something a little bit, but they're not really getting anything. You see it? So America presence in Africa, not only in Ghana, all over, like even in Congo, all those places, in Liberia, all those places, and controlling the sea, the major port in all those places is for a reason. You see it? So, and Russia too is taking their troop there. And Russia having a major troop there, and the Chinese too are having a major troop in Africa. So the issue here is they are all coming for their interest. Like I said, we might be, I said it last time, we might be expecting some kind of a conflict that will come down the line, and their conflict will be protecting their territory, protecting their interests. You see, it was for a reason after the 1884 Berlin Conference, it was for a reason that Liberia was not taken by either the French or the British or the Portuguese or the German, because the US was already there. So that's why Liberia was not listed among those other people. And it was for a reason the US was not part of the 1884 Brennan Conference, because America was already in Africa. So there was no need for America to be part of that Brennan Conference. So because she was already there and she already had a ground there. So it's a long history that you really got to put the puzzles together. So I mean, the point here is, it shouldn't be a factor that will discourage Africans from going back home. The only thing we have to do is we have to educate our leaders. Like these things is not even it's not a mutual benefit to Africa or whatsoever. Africa do not have a military in America. Africa do not have a military in China. Africa do not have a military in Russia. Africa do not have a military in any part of the world or controlling any major port in the world. So it's not even a mutual benefit to Africa. We should put stop to these things. And, we shouldn't encourage it, because at the end of the day, these people, they are not there for us, and they will never be there for us. And in fact, let me say this. When it comes to Europe and the West, they are liars. When it comes to them, especially when it comes to Africa, these people are liars. We should never trust them. Their aim is always different. So we African, we have to study these people and know how to make a deal with them. We should also be able to give these people options. They are not the one to give us options all the time. We should give them options, but we never do it, and we just allow them to come in with whatever plan they have. We never give them option. They come to us and give an option in our own home, and which is wrong. So some of these things, we have to take it into consideration. All we have to do is we need to let our government know. We need to expose these people, and we pray that these messages that we putting out there reach to them, and let some of them sit down critically and look at it and have a sense of thought that, what, these kids are saying something real. That's my point.
Okay, so we have a question inside of the chat. It's actually from Richard Victor Dixon. Hey, Richard. He says, "How do you also Dwayne?" So he wants to know, is World War III going to break out on the continent of Africa? Dwayne, what do you think about that?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say on the continent, but we saw during the previous two world wars that Africa, if the Third World War does break out, Africa will play a very significant part of that, even going down to the Second World War. Obviously, we know the atomic bomb, the materials taken to produce that bomb was taken right out of Africa. So because Africa produces, resources that are so central to maintaining a lot of these global empires, that if a world war was to break out, Africa would in some ways be at the center of that. I don't know if necessarily, conflicts will be fought in Africa, although that was the case in the world wars. But yeah, I think Africa would be at the center. I mean, we're seeing it right now with the competition between the United States and China over control in Africa. So that's, my take on that.
The Chinese connection, I think, would definitely be, if anything, the biggest aggravating factor, because what we see right now is a lot of African countries. I would say more so than any other Western country are allied with China, because China is right now offering the biggest deals, money grabs, I would say, to African leaders. And so now the loyalty is kind of shifted. So the question is going to be, I would think, yes, that the answer is going to be that the U.S. not having the loyalty of Africa, as far as even things as far as votes inside of the UN, them not having the loyalty of Africa, but also not having control of the resources the same that they used to, that's a direct threat to the United States imperialistic agenda. And many people have said that the days of America being this big giant is over. Internationally, the days of America being a world police is over. However, it seems like while it's over, that's going to be replaced with China. So I think that definitely would be the likeliest case scenario, where you have proxy wars basically going on, where the United States is trying to hold on to whatever strongholds it did have or reestablish itself inside of the region of Africa. So I agree, Africa would definitely have to play a huge role inside of a World War III. And a lot of people are thinking it could come sooner rather than later, with all the aggression between America and China right now. So we have another question, and then here, if you want to introduce the next topic after this. So it is Africa. I'm sorry, one second. Okay. How do you think Africa should start developing its own military forces? I think that's a really good question. I've heard a lot of people say that can we really be talking about African independence, Africa self-determination, if Africa doesn't really have its own army? Like, African armies are funded by outside governments, and so there's not like a sovereign African army that's not allied with anyone. Probably one of the last strong holdouts for that would probably be Zimbabwe, but now we know the Zimbabwe army is controlled by the Chinese. So how does Africa develop its own military forces? Anyone who wants to answer?
Let me come in quick. I mean, coming to that questions, it just means, it is a question relating to liberation, total liberation. Number one, the only way we can have a stronghold of self defensive, we having our own military. Number one, we have to create our own weapons. We cannot even create our own weapons. All of our weapons that we have come from overseas, come from either America, if you have a tie with America, and then come from Germany, if you have a tie with Germany, come from France, if you have a tie with France, like the French English speaking, the French, the Francophone nation, or come from England, if you have a tie with the British. You see it? So in our case, how can you fight the enemy if the enemy is the one supplying you? So you can never fight the enemy. And second, if we want to have our own military, our own defense system, we have to be the one to train ourselves. But half of the African nations, all their armies, like Liberia is number one, their armies are being trained in the United States here. And you see it? So how can you fight your enemies when, I'm not saying the United States is an enemy to Liberia now, but I'm just giving a scenario. How can you fight your enemies when your enemy is the one training you? You see it? You can now fight your enemy when your enemy is the one training you, because the first thing, they are never going to give you a full training because they know you might come against them at some point of time. So they will never give you a full training. You see it? So in order for us to have our own defensive system, we have to create our own weapon. Number one, we have to have our own scientists, our own engineering, and we have to be the one to train ourselves on Air Force or ground troop. We have to train ourselves militarily and defensively, and we also have to take control of our major ports. And you never see any African war tank, sitting on an American port. You never see on a Japanese, on a or Chinese port. We have to control our own port militarily, and have a defense mechanism system set in place. You see, and in doing that too, we have to send these forces. These military forces, these foreign military forces proliferating on the continent, we have to send them back because they are all there to spy on us. Like, for example, the last time I saw American military, and they're saying they are in Africa for the Ghanaian military to train them. How can a Ghanaian military train an American military? It sounds good, but that's not the case. They are there to spy on you. They are there for you to train them on the African soil so that they can get used to the African soil, so that they can get used to the African forest. You see it? Because the point here is they might go to war with one day with not African, but with Chinese, with Japanese, with Russians on the continent. So they are there to prepare themselves. So to answer that question, we just have to do away with foreign military on the continent, and we have to train ourselves. We have to build our own war tanks and all of those things. We cannot continue asking people to donate to or to give to us. In case, how can we go to war with them? And they are the one giving it to us. So we should be our own scientists and our own doctors, our own lawyers.
Okay, Pierre, do you want to introduce the next topic?
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. Here we go. All right. So, the next topic is basically on the state of Uganda. Let's see. We got so basically just a little background before we even really get into what the topic is. So we know Uganda is economically struggling like a lot of countries, on the continent. The government controlled by the president. He's not very popular anymore amongst the masses. And so the topic we had was basically going to be talking about kind of how Kanye West visited Uganda and how it represents kind of the relationship between us Africans, in America and Africans on the continent. Because if Kanye was a little more conscious or, in what's going on over there, I don't think he would, because I don't think he really understands what it means to just go and visit and basically have photo ops with the president and come up with all different type of plans. I think they said here, I have, let me find what they said. They talked about. So Bobby Wine, which we know Bobby Wine is the musician who turned politician and was basically challenging the system in Uganda. And he had this to say about Kanye West's visit. Okay. The politician who was arrested, no, sorry. So he said he is hobnobbing with a president who has been in power now for 32 years and restricts any freedom, a country where opposition activists are tortured and imprisoned. He also said it would have been great if he had used his voice for the good of people in Africa. Said why he was, I am a musician, but I am not allowed to stage a show in my own country because I disagree with the president. It is very disappointing. Okay, so basically, Kanye West is kind of like enemy of the true African people there, right? I wanted to read real quick about Bobby Wine and his the situation when he was captured and tortured, to kind of give a little more understanding on why he might feel this way. All right, so this is his words on what happened. Basically, he was taken, tortured. His bodyguard was killed, I believe. Shot. Was he shot and killed? I know he was shot. Was he killed? Yeah, he was killed. All right. Yeah. So this is his description on what happened when he was taken. They wrapped me in a thick piece of cloth and bundled me into a vehicle. Those guys did to me unspeakable things in that vehicle. They pulled my manhood and squeezed my testicles while punching me with objects I didn't see. They beat, punched, and kicked me with their boots. No part of my body was spared. They hit my eyes, mouth, and nose. They hit my elbows and knees, he added. By the time I became conscious again, I was somewhere in a small room with a small window. My legs were tied together with my hands with very tight cuffs. I was bleeding from the nose and ears. I was in great pain. The cloth they had tied red, soaked in blood. So that's what happened when he was captured, basically, and then he was accused of treason. I think he's going to have to stand trial. But basically, I mean, we know this was it was a political arrest, just because he's facing this system and he's going to win. If they actually do a reasonable vote, they've accused the president of sabotaging the election a few times, and the population is 80. I think 80% is under 30. And the leader of the country, he's at least over 70. I don't know exactly how old he is. So obviously it's time for a change, and they're doing everything they can to keep that change from happening. Things like this, kidnapping the leaders. And I beat him so bad that he had to come to the States and try to get medical attention. Recently, I read that he tried to do a concert, and even though his team says they had everything in order. The police intervened and basically kind of blocked the concert. So it's there's a lot of tension. It's becoming real tight. So Kanye West visiting right now with the president. That's why it looks so bad, and it's became kind of a controversy. And just for the record, I think Kanye said he was visiting to work on his album and to kind of, I guess, talk diplomacy with Uganda. That's why he claimed to be there. So I got a few questions, but who wants to go ahead and comment on that first?
Heck, I'll jump in. So my view on that is two things about that situation stands out to me. The first of which, I don't know if you all saw, but Kanye also said recently he's channeling the spirit of artists such as Tupac, Fela Kuti, and Bob Marley, and that was interesting to me because Fela Kuti, he's most known for being the artist that uses music to criticize African dictators and stand up to that level of oppression. So it's interesting to see Kanye trying to put himself on that status when he's going to Africa to hang out with African dictators and to give him shoes. But the other part of it, and it's not just Kanye. I've noticed this on the part of a lot of people in African diaspora, is that we don't really understand what goes on in the continent. So a lot of the times we find ourselves actually siding with these same dictators. And I wrote an article recently for an organization on the continent called Africans Rising. And in the article, I point out that there was an emancipation celebration in Trinidad and Tobago, and they invited Ugandan President Museveni to attend this celebration. And he's there with the Prime Minister of Trinidad, and they're celebrating this occasion, which is the celebration of the emancipation of African people in Trinidad and Tobago. And on the one hand, you have this the ceremony which is supposed to celebrate the emancipation and the liberation of African people, and you're inviting an African dictator who is oppressing African people in his own country to participate in the celebration. So I think we in diaspora need to do a better job of informing ourselves of exactly what's going on the continent and being more conscious about certain things, so that we don't find ourselves even supporting certain dictators like the one in Uganda.
I thought it was interesting, also, especially watching the whole White House fiasco. The biggest thing that I took away from that was how Kanye West was repeatedly saying how he identifies with America, and how America is the greatest country. We have to be worried about how our president looks to the world. America, America, America. So he's definitely aligning himself with America, but then he goes back to Africa. And he did exactly what someone who aligns with America would do when they go back to Africa. He went there basically representing an outsider. He wasn't there as an African person. I don't know if he even, I would think that he doesn't even identify himself as an African person. Right now, the train that he's on, it seems like he completely just wants to identify himself as being American, and that being the biggest thing that he is. So it was very interesting seeing him there. He's definitely not in touch with the continent or what's going on. But then again, even if he were, I don't know if that would necessarily deter him from meeting with the Uganda president. When you look at the fact that he just met with Trump, and we know that Trump, all the things that Trump represents, and he didn't mind sitting there with him because at the end of the day, Trump represents power, and the president of Uganda, albeit a puppet, does represent power in that country. And so he's definitely seems like the type of person that wants to stand next to power rather than trying to stand next to someone who's a moral leader or someone who's actually connected to the people. So if anything, I don't want this to become the new cool thing for so-called African Americans to go to Africa and hang with these dictators and whatnot. We have to, like Dwayne said, become conscious of ourselves as African people and understand that when our people are suffering like they are in Uganda, when they're dealing with a destabilized government, a president who has been well known to have been one of the favorites of America, favorites of the West, because he's consistently sold his people out, that we have to be, instead of identifying ourselves with the power structure, identify ourselves with the people who are suffering as a result of these politicians.
Yeah, let me just say a quick statement. Hello?
We hear you.
Okay, yeah, let me just make a quick statement. First of all, I want to say, we thank God, or we thank the Creator for the 21st century. We have various means of communication where we can communicate, and our communications, go through, faster than it was, doing our forefather, where the means of communication was so scarcity or was so scarce that they couldn't just voice their concerns and then it be reached out to millions of people. But now it can reach out to millions of people in a minute, in a second. So Kanye West, going to Africa, he wasn't there to represent African people. He was there to represent what I would say white America, the people like Donald Trump. He was there to represent them and to make African on the continent think that, what they hear about the struggle of African in the diaspora or in America here is not true. So basically, that's what he was there for, as a picture. So, but we know that's what white America always, been doing. They use the horse Negro to go and advocate for the masses of the people. But Kanye West being in Africa is on destruction, and it will never distract any of us. We will get the message across and we will expose, what he was in Africa for or their intention, and it will get quickly to the people on social media, on whatsoever platform, and we get to them and they will be aware of the situation. So Kanye West situation in Africa is not even something that we should worry about. It's not going to do, nothing. He was just there, because I saw one of them, he was there, doing music and like he was doing rehearsal, like he went to record his album. I don't know what kind of album, he called a name, but I just look at it, and sometimes I listen to these things, I went through it and I watched it for a couple of minutes, but they are all distractions that shouldn't move us, because right now, African, we know what is going on.
We have a few audience questions. I don't know if Pierre, you wanted to ask some more questions first, or should I just go to the audience?
You can go. Yeah, you can ask those questions. That's fine.
Okay, so this is one specifically for Frank. Nathan Blackson wants to know, what are your steps to an independent Africa, and what's the status of the scientists, engineers, etc. in Africa?
My step to independent Africa is to see Africa compete with the rest of the world, just like any other nations in the world. And I would say my dream for Africa is for Africa to unite, all the African nations on the continent to unite, and to have one United States of Africa, like it was Kwame Nkrumah's dream. It had been Karl dream, Kwame Ture, it had been his dream, and most of our leaders, even Muammar Gaddafi, it had been Muammar Gaddafi's dream, and that was one of the reasons why the West killed him, because he was one of the Pan-Africanists that was pushing it in the 21st century and that was sponsoring it. And that's what they don't want. They don't want no African leaders, or the West or the European don't want no, or the neo-colonialists don't want no African leaders that will come on, to financially sponsors African agenda. They will get you out, or they will come against you. And that this is where we African, the young African that are coming out, and the young African leaders that are coming out, we have to be, we have to take notes of these things, and we have to support one another whenever we see any of our peer or colleagues in power. We have to support them and start supporting outside influence. So my stance on Africa, is for Africa to be independent, fully independent, totally liberated, and having African to push African agenda, and not outsider coming to push African agenda, and not outsider coming to fund the AU. That the African themselves fund AU. We have the resources. We have, like, for example, let's just go to Zambia. When I listened to the Chinese ambassador in Zambia, when he was giving statistics that the amount export that the export Zambia sent to China every year is in billions. When he was reading his statement, it's in billions. Then the money that come into the how they call it, the input that come into Zambia is like in million. So you see, so these are the things we're talking about. You see, so in a year, just a nation in Africa, the raw material is sent, and the exports they're talking about here is not any other thing. It's all raw material. It's all diamond. It's all gold. It's all copper. All these things, billions of dollars a year. I'm not saying they say, or I'm not just saying something. I said the Chinese ambassador in Zambia. That was his paper that he was reading. A year, Zambia export billions of dollars of raw material to China. Then what China export like finished product, like electronic stuff, millions. You see, so these are the things we're talking about. That we should be able to take control. We should be able to process these things in Africa and make it into finished product. I'm not saying we should be so mean and not to supply other nations, but we should process them the same way they can process it. We should be able to process this in Africa. We should be able to create our own scientists. We should build institutions that will build that will bring us scientists in Africa. We should build institutions that will bring us lawyers. We should build institutions that will bring us doctors in Africa. For example, look at the food we eat. Some of the food we eat now, like the food, some of the food coming from China or the Chinese making, are not real food. Like there was a news in Kenya. The bag of rice the Chinese made were all rubber, were all poison food that they make that got leaked out. So these are the things we're talking about. That when I'm saying we should be for the independent or liberated, we should be able to do things on our own and not waiting for outsider to come and do it, or not waiting for outside influence. We should be the one to construct our own roles. You see it? So that is development. Development is not when people come into your country and take full control of your country and build past cripple all the way up and build your institution and thing. That's not development, because who's going to maintain it? It is the same people that will maintain it. And by them maintaining it, it's called replication, because they are there for their interest. Development is where your people can build their own bridges and maintain it. In 10, 15 years time, they can come by and rebuild it. Development is where your own people can build their institution that will fit according to the climatic condition of Africa. These are the things I'm talking about. You see, I'm not saying we should be, we should liberate ourselves from other people. We can still share, but we should be in total control.
Okay, one more audience question, and I'm gonna throw it back to Pierre, and then we'll go to, I believe, Frank, you have a topic that we're gonna talk about next. So this is a question from Adrian H. It says, are there any African countries that have a government that was created and developed by the African ethnic groups that inhabit a particular region? I think I'm gonna throw this one to our Minister of Information, who's our historian. Is there any governments that you would say are actually made by an African ethnic group?
None. I mean, colonialism impacted the continent to a point where the only two African countries that actually weren't colonized were Liberia and Ethiopia. Now, if you know Liberia's history, Liberia was, I mean, more or less an American colony, although it wasn't, called that. And Ethiopia was never colonized, but what happened? Because everything around Ethiopia was being colonized. By virtue of that happening, the borders that we have in Ethiopia were colonial creations, but they weren't created by the Ethiopians. They were created outside Ethiopia. So the emperor of Ethiopia at the time, Menelik, he was really scrambling to try to conquer as much territory within the region as possible so that he could defend his kingdom better against the European encroachment into his land. But yeah, when you look at the African continent today, every single nation in Africa is the product of the scramble for Africa and how the colonialists drew up those borders. So we don't have a situation where African ethnic group actually got together and was able to develop a nation of their own, and that continues to be an issue in Africa today. And I'll use one example that's has been mentioned before: Cameroon. The situation in Cameroon, where you have one part of the country which was formerly colonized by the English, they feel oppressed because the majority of the country is a former French colony. So you have a majority French-speaking country, and the English-speaking part of the country is a minority within that country, and they feel oppressed. And there's a lot of violence and tension going on right now because a lot of the English-speaking people want to succeed from Cameroon and create their own nation. And this is a situation that was produced by the colonizers. The colonizers came in there, carved up Cameroon, decided, the French are going to take one part, British are going to take another part. And when you look at these conflicts throughout the continent, throughout Africa, you find multiple examples of ethnic issues that draw their origin from the colonial period. Another example I'll give is Rwanda. A lot of people don't realize the Rwandan genocide, that was the product of German and Belgian divide and rule. The Hutu and the Tutsi people, they're the same people. They speak the same language. They have the same culture, the same history. The Europeans are the ones that came in there and created that division. So part of the consequence of the Europeans creating these African nations is you have a lot of tensions, ethnic tensions, linguistic tensions that are the product of colonialism. But to answer the question, no, every single country on the African continent is the product of European colonialism, including the countries that weren't formally colonized.
Okay, Pierre, you have a follow-up question?
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a follow-up question, but I do want the viewers seem to be wondering, like, why are we talking about Kanye? Great question. I'm tired of hearing about Kanye. But I don't think we can just dismiss this off as Kanye just being Kanye at this point. Like, we see him being used here in America by Trump to basically to try to get as many black voters to switch to the Republican Party and possibly get them to side with Trump, because, the next election is up for grabs or whatever. So we see him being used here in that way. And now we see him being used on the continent of Africa as a puppet as well, siding with basically sold out, corrupt African leaders. So I don't think we can just dismiss it as that's just Kanye. It doesn't matter what he say, doesn't matter. I think what he says, does matter when you got so many people who are obviously influenced by it. Here in Chicago, for instance, like, I'm shocked by the people who are fully siding with Kanye and supporting him. A lot of people, including a lot of activists and a lot of people who I thought was, freedom fighters, are saying, well, at least he's doing this, at least he's doing that. And they're not, for some reason, able to see through him being used. I don't know why. I don't know if he's being used because of his mental illness or if he's just compromised, but we see what's going on. And it has an impact when Kanye goes to Uganda. He kind of like represents us, whether we want him to or not. The Africans over there see us as like, why is this, how's this Black American coming over here and then siding with the enemy? So I think it's important because it's a time for us to draw lines, like we said last time we spoke. We need to draw lines of who's the enemy. If you're working with the enemy, you are the enemy. So people in Uganda need to know that when Kanye West comes over there, it's the enemy coming over there. That's not your brother. That's not us coming over there. That's the enemy coming over there. So that's why I wanted to put it in here.
No, and it was a great topic. And, let me follow up with that and say that we have to understand, I don't think any of us in FAL are, followers of celebrities, like, fans, like to where we're just going to talk about things that they do. However, because different people are national figures, they are case scenarios that we can explore and actually analyze. So to me, Kanye West could be a case study on the effects of white supremacy on the Black man's psychology. So it's not about him. It's about dissecting what is going on with him, because a lot of these things that are going on with him are going on with different African people in America to different degrees. We also talked about Tiffany Haddish on our last broadcast because she felt like she didn't want to comment on diversity. It's not because we care about Tiffany Haddish. It's because there's things that she said that I've heard other African people say, or there's attitudes that she expounded by not wanting to get involved in the Black liberation struggle that have to be explored. So when we talk about celebrities, don't think of it as us just wanting to talk about famous names. We're actually talking about what they represent, but also how can we discuss what these people are doing, their mentality, in a way that actually reflects many of our mentalities so that we can address these things as they come up. So Frank, you have a topic about an important story that happened in Liberia. Do you want to introduce it?
Yeah. This topic is about a nonprofit organization that came from the United States, a United States-based nonprofit organization that was established in Liberia sometime during a year from the previous government's Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, through this lady called Katie Mar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name the right way, but that's the best way I can pronounce it, Katie Mar. She's a New Jersey resident. And first of all, let me just go back to, to a little bit history about Liberia before, how Liberia came to its today. Liberia is a country that went through 14 years of war. I'm not going to go into detail, but Liberia is a country that went through 14 years of war. And after this 14 years of war, we have a lot of situations, in the country. We have circumstances like, issue of life, prostitution, jobs, education, all those things. So, like, how these charity organizations here, they do research. They do research and then see a country that is very in need that they can go, and establish an organization and quickly make money for themselves. That's what they do. That's what most of these charity organizations do. And I believe Katie Mile organization was one of those that used the circumstances of the Liberian people to raise money to enrich herself. So the story started because as I did some research and also watched a documentary that was done on her after the whole incident. And I think it's about 45-minute documentary. So I watched the whole thing to really get a full understanding. So she went to Liberia. Last time I think she was 19 or 20 or something. She went to Liberia for some tourism or whatsoever. And then she met this individual who a Liberian resident called Macintosh. So, and this Macintosh individual, he was a guy who fought in a war before. And he influenced on a lot of cases because, after the war, Liberia, you just had these cases on the street and passing around and nothing to do, no education, nothing. So they're all vulnerable, they're just walking around there. So this man had the influence of putting cases together, singing song or beating drum whatsoever. So this girl, while in Liberia, she found the means of, I can do this as a way of organization and raise money. So she did that, and then she met this man, she did that in Liberia, and then they called the organization, Me Too movement or something like that. So that's just a history. And then, but according to her mission, she wanted to change the entire educational system in Liberia. So we sound good on paper, just going to a country that have been torn apart and you want to change the educational system. But my question here is what is a study have she done on Liberia that she want to change the educational system? But if you have corrupt government in power, government who don't care for the people, government who don't want to help the people they serve, they fall for these narrow-minded statement or organizations that go into the country. So, but while she was into the country and while she funded this organization and getting millions of data from people like Warren Buffett and some Fortune 400 or 500 company or whatsoever. But the situation here is that as I read it, as I went through the documentary, they said she never had no structure. Like her organization had no structure. She never had no trained staff. Even the staff that came from the United States here, there was not trained people. For example, this guy took advantage of the Liberian people because you live in America here, you never open an institution, especially daycare, especially something that had to do with human services. You never hire people who don't, who have not done a criminal investigation or criminal background or child abuse clearance or all those things. Or you have to do some kind of investigation, or you have to carry some kind of vaccine record, all these things. Nothing like that. Because you feel that you're in a third world country. So she hired these staff. These staff have no training, but there was a Liberian nurse, who have this training, who have worked with a lot of organization, NGO before, that she worked there. So she is the mediator that was really giving the story, the full detail of the story. Now, So when this whole thing came out, and Katie Meyer, she was getting money. So the thing about her, she know how to talk. She know how to sell herself out there publicly, like speaking to raise money. So she raised a lot of money, a lot of thousands of dollars. And she had this organization going on. Of course, she had to, have this organization going on to show pictures, to her donors, for her donors to be impressed and encouraged to give more money. And that's why when more money was going into the business, and she wants numerous awards, and all those things. But it came to a point where these girls, it was all girls' school. It came to a point where these girls that she was, sponsoring, this guy that she used to do the recruitment, were molesting these girls, were abusing these girls, were raping these girls. So he will rape some of these girls, and then, before bringing them into the scholarship. And then some of them were still being raped while into the scholarship. You see? And then the nurse for the organization noticed like 11 years old, 10 years old, children having sex, imagine. And she noticed it. And because she normally treated these children. And then some of these children, decided to narrate the story to her of what was going on. So according to her, from the initial stage, she was afraid because, number one, Katie Meyer and this Mr. McIntosh, man, they were in a dating relationship, or they were in a romance relationship. So she was afraid that, that other side. And so she was also afraid of losing her job, she said. So, but she never kept it to herself. After, I think, a couple of months or so, she told Katie Meyer. But Katie Meyer did not take further investigation. And why I believe that she did that, because she didn't care. She was actually there to get her money to live her lively life in America here, to live a flamboyant life in America, even though she was still doing some impact. But she was, half of the money was still being with her, living a good life here, a life that she will go work from paycheck to paycheck. She will never live that life. But, she was young, seeing the circumstances of people in a third world country and living a good life here. So she never cared to do, further investigation of what the nurse told her. And secondly, Katie Meyer also had a gust at that time. She took these children to club. So the story is very deep. Something was going behind the scene. She took numerous times. She took these children to club. 10 years old girl, imagine taking her to club, taking her to bar, midnight, 12, 1, taking them there. And she was taking them to high class clubs, like foreign clubs. You see? So basically what was going on there, we don't even know. Maybe these children were being used for sex trafficking. These underage children were being used for sex trafficking. Maybe she was making them drunk. And at the end, people come and have them and they pay her. Nobody knows. So it's a deep story. And you see, so she was taking them to this hotel and giving them to people and having sex with these children. And then they pay her. Nobody knows. Because in America here, even 18 years old, you don't take them to club, you don't take them to bar. But, I mean, think about this. There's an institution. You running an institution. And at times, they found her numerous pictures lying down in bed with these children. These children are not your adopted children that you say, I lie down in bed with my kids, something. No, you running an institution. You running a school. And you lie down in bed with these kids. Like, what are you telling us? I mean, the story is deep. And, it's very deep. It's very deep.
Wasn't there like an official who also had HIV, I believe, that was sleeping with these girls?
Yeah. The official name is, he was called McIntosh Johnson. You see it? So he was the one that was having this case. You see it? But I believe Katie Meyer was also using these children for sex trafficking. By you taking them to club, by you taking them to party, by you taking them to hotel, who are you taking these kids with? I think they're supposed to be in bed by that time of the night because they have to study, they have to go to school the next day. And you're taking them to these places. You see, so it's deep. You see it? Why were you taking these kids or whatever for? I think you should be the one doing the investigation. Like, what? Why are you taking these girls to club or to party? But you are the one doing it. You see? So, and then some of these girls that were raped, Some of them died from AIDS. And then in 2014, this Liberian gentleman that the story says he was dating Katie Meyer. He got arrested in 2014, and they took him to court. And then on the days of the trial, this is where the whole situation is very deep. On the days of the trial, the nurse in the documentary, or the court did not allow the girl to testify. And then Katie Meyer did not attend the court or the hearing. And then, and there was a statement that this individual, the Mr. McIntosh guy, that he had AIDS and he had sex with some of these children. Some of these because of that, some of these children had AIDS also. The court did not do proper investigation to follow up on this case. On the case that that was the cause, it was the cause of the rape that the girl is and all those things. Nothing. The court did not do that. You see it? So the court, at the end of the day, the court dismissed the case and they said the case were lying. It was not true that these things happened. And then they let this guy go free. And in 2014, he died. So right now, the situation here, this is a situation I didn't even know about it. I just got to know about the situation recently because the government that was in power, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, again, she's one of them. She also be involved because you as a president, a female president, and you say you was raped before, and you seen a rape victim, 10 years old children, and you can't protect them, and you can't, run after their cases, and then you just, you kept silent and you just brush it on the road. And, so like it's very deep. And at the end of the day, and then the girl that did a documentary in a video, she said Katie Meyer have nothing to say to the Liberian people. She got nothing to tell the Liberian people. So that was a slap in our face, for that, because she's sitting in America here now. Of course, she enjoying her money. The money that she raised, she enjoying it. She don't even have to work for a lifetime because she got millions of dollars from what she was doing. So she don't even have to work for a lifetime. You see it? So I mean, this is what went on, in Liberia, and up to now. Even some of those girls that got raped, some of them died already. Some of those girls died, and they died, and evidence showed that they died from AIDS. You see it? And she caused a lot of trouble because some of those girls, even in Liberia, that was on the academy, that was in our school, they are left vulnerable right now. They're not in schools, and some of them now they have to go out on the street to do prostitution. You see it?
Yeah.
So that's what we and Liberian people did not get any justice, and she's here, having a good life from the money she raised from those children. She's living a good life for her lifetime. You see, so that's the situation. These charity organizations like go in a third world country and to go in the name of helping. They're not really there to help, but they are there to raise money for themselves to live a livelihood that they would never imagine themselves living if they work from paycheck to paycheck.
And for me, this story, I did a video recently saying how really Africans, quoting John Henrik Clarke, that we really don't have friends. Anytime for me, when you sent me the story, Frank, anytime that I see of charity or nonprofit organization and the people who started it is European, and the organization is basically serving African people, Black people, I'm always suspicious. And one of the reasons I'm suspicious, number one, is because it's interesting that a lot of times these organizations are willing to have a mission statement like, we're going to feed the poor of Zimbabwe, we're going to clothe the naked in Kenya, stuff like that. But they don't ever take a position against the actual system that put that in that position, because obviously they're benefiting from the system. They benefit from the fact that these children are poor. They benefit from the fact that that certain kids aren't getting education, because all of that money that could be given to the people is being wired instead to the United States or to the West. So I'm always very distrustful of these types of organizations. But the other thing is that, I'm always wondering, why is it that this is happening so much with African children? I mean, it happens in the Caribbean. It happens, I think in Haiti, there was a similar story of a missionary who was raping Black boys. But this is supposed to be the era of Me Too, where everyone cares about rape and everyone wants to get justice for rape. So we'll have these long Supreme Court proceedings about Kavanaugh for a rape that he did, what, in the 80s or something like that. These are things that are happening every day, and whenever African children are the victims, no one wants to talk about it. And you know darn well if this was a case where, let's say, a bunch of, like something like the Catholic Church, that's a national controversy. A lot of people are looking at the Catholic Church, but not anywhere of the same outrage is present when it comes to these organizations, these people who say that they're for charity actually having something to do with the rape of African children. So do any of you have any other thoughts on that?
One thing I'll add is that the United Nations peacekeepers are actually some of the worst in terms of sexual abuse. We've had issues with that not only in Haiti but in the Central African Republic and Sudan, Congo. So it's a very common issue across the African continent, not only with charitable nonprofit organizations, even organizations like the UN, which is supposed to be an international organization upholding human rights. Even they've been engaged in the sexual abuse going on in Africa and the Caribbean.
Okay, Pierre, do you have any thing to add? And then I'll look into some audience questions to see if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit. This is why we have to make this. We have to stand up a little more and stop being so nice.
Yes.
I just feel like as African people by nature, we're nice beings. Like we don't seek to harm people. So sometimes that takes over, and there's evil out there that's good. So I just think that I think a change is coming. I do think that World War III is coming, and I don't know if it'll break out on the African continent or not necessarily coming already here, really, but it's going to really come to the front, and it's going to have to be Africans together versus whoever, that's how it's going to be this time. Like that's what it's going to be. We can't, because America doesn't care about little girls getting raped in Africa, doesn't mean that the 40 million Africans in America can't make a stance that they do care about it, and that's our problem. So when we don't stand up, America speaks for us, and that's not going to that's going to have to change as well. We're going to have to choose a side. Like we all understand what we've sacrificed to have a citizenship here, but at the end of the day, when it comes to Africans versus everybody, are you African or are you American? And I'm going to be an African first, and that's how we got to be. And like you said, Black lives just don't matter, not just here, but everywhere. We see it all the time. We can see, like you said, a few white. I hate to see anybody get raped, but white women get molested, and it's a whole movement. We could get 100 Nigerian girls get raped or kidnapped, or anything, and you won't even see it in news here in the States. So I just what we're doing is trying to make sure that we understand. That's why we're Pan-Africanists and Black nationalists. Simply because that's how it's going to have to be. It's going to have to be us versus them. That's how they look at it. They don't. Whatever their disagreements is, they put it to the side until they deal with us first. So that's how we got to look at it. Whatever our disagreements is, whatever it is, we got to put that to the side and say it's us versus them first. And that's how we're going to survive. That's how we're going to win the war. So that just that goes back to this same thing. Like a lot of people saying, where are African men? I don't know, but we should be more involved. We can do more to stand up for them girls, and that's what we're not doing.
And you had a really good point. I just want to kind of go back to about all because white America is not talking about these things doesn't mean that Africans in America, we should not be talking about these things. The thing that pisses me off whenever certain issues are picked by the mainstreams, for example, with Kavanaugh or with different, you know, Bill Cosby, with any type of these mainstream cases, is that you'll see so many of our people caping for these issues, but they're not consistent. So whenever these things are happening in the Black community, why aren't you as consistently outraged? When these things are happening with Africans, with all of our people, why are we not consistently outraged? And it should be us who understands by now that when Black lives, they really don't matter. We should have known that before we started seeing all these video recordings of police killings, because even like the subconscious way that the society tells us that we don't matter. For example, if you watch like like CNN International or Al Jazeera or whatever, a lot of times the reporter will say there was a bombing inside of so and so country. There were 2 Americans, and that's all that they focus on. They don't focus on the fact there were 200 other people who were not American. They don't focus on the fact that there were African people who died also. Another great example was the shootings that happened in Paris. While they were definitely horrific, there were similar shootings that were happening on the continent of Africa, similar terroristic events that have killed way more people, and yet you had all the African leaders flock to Paris for this day of peace. They would never flock to other African countries to show that type of unity. You would never see them changing their Facebook profile in order to have solidarity with Cameroon, have solidarity with Kenya, have solidarity with any of these nations. And so this is why we have to be very particular on who lets us drive our dialogue. A lot of us, we let the mainstream media drive our dialogue. The mainstream media has no interest in us talking about things that pertain to us because they don't care about us. They don't value us. So that's just something to keep in mind with stories like this. To me, these trials, I didn't know about this story till Frank sent it to me, but this type of trial, you would think like young African schoolgirls being raped and given AIDS, you would think something like that would be as big of a story as Bill Cosby. You would think, but it's not, because they don't care about African lives. They don't care about African children. Even though children are the most innocent, purest types of human beings, to them, they're just Black children and they don't care about them. So that's why we have to talk about these things and be our own voice and be our own rallying cry whenever things like this happen. And let me just go ahead, Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just add out to that. That just go again to the question that the gentleman asked earlier about, you know, Africa being independent. Like when I mean, that also go to says, you know, whether you are on the continent or whether you are out of the continent, as long as you are Black, as long as you are African, we all need to come together, because I think by now we should know that the world don't care when it comes to Africans' life, when it comes to Black life. The world don't care. So if the world don't care, we have to care. We have to come together in every corner of the world to solve our problem, to recognize what is happening to us, to explain to each other what we need to do to find solution to our problem, because the world don't care and the world will never care until we ourselves care. Like Kwame Nkrumah said, Africa can never be free unless Africa themselves free Africa. African problem will never be solved unless Africans themselves recognize their situation and find solution to their situation. And part of that solution today could be we Africans all over the world, all around the corner, all around the world, come together in one unity to solve our problem. Come together in one unity and protest together and cry together and sing together and dance together and eat together and do everything together. That's the only way. We narrate our own story, then people come in narrating our story. We do our own research and see what can be best for us in this time and what can be best for the next coming generation. Or as if we allow people to come and continue doing research, what best for the next generation, it will now be, we will go in the next generation will now find a peaceful place to live.
And this is just a question, and I think, Frank, since you're actually from Liberia, Pierre alluded to this question when he was answering, giving his thoughts, but I've seen it a couple of times in the chat. Some people are saying, with this story that you mentioned, where were the men, the Liberian men, where were they to protect the woman?
I I mean, the story happened in Liberia, and you see, when you in a country, well, nobody care. When I say nobody care, I don't want to say the Liberian people don't care. They care, but when you're in a situation where you can't even find your daily bread a day to eat, it's very hard to see something and then go, or want to get into it, or want to even do a follow research, or want to even follow the story. Because at the end of the day, you will not even get people to support you. You live in a country where you don't even have the law by your side. The law don't even protect you when you come over a story. If you don't have money to bribe the law, to give to the law, for the law to stand by you, while you do that research, or while you continue that program whatsoever, the law going to take you, on the other side as even a bad person, and the law going to get you out, or even the government going to come against you. You see it? And when you're running behind something that the government is spearheading, it's hard for you. For example, such situation like this, we know the government knows something about it. A lot of time, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf knows something about it. Because you can't tell me as a president, you seen an 11 years or 12 years old girl being raped, and you can't do nothing about it, and you said that. So tell me, what would a citizen do? So, I mean, and this guy, first of all, he was a Liberian. He raped these girls. You see it? And then, secondly, the same lady, Katie, who had the organization, what would she do when she's the same person taking these children to club, taking these children to party, doing sex trafficking? Even though there's no evidence here right now that she did sex trafficking with these children, but you can assume that she was also doing the sex trafficking. What are you doing with a 10-year-old girl in a club at midnight? You see it? And in a foreign club at midnight, at hotel. What are you doing with these 10-year-old girls at hotel? At that time, they should be in bed. So it proved that you were also doing sex trafficking. It proved that there was something deep behind this whole situation. You see it? And then what would the man do when the court were not even in the mood to protect these girls, the court system in the country? Because on the date of the court day, the nurse for this case, the court did not allow her to testify. The court denied her. She wasn't there. And Katie Meyer, she wasn't there. They didn't allow her to come and talk. And secondly, and when these guys that infected this girl with AIDS, when he was in jail, according to phone record, Katie Meyer and this guy were constantly communicating. So Katie Meyer obviously knew about the whole situation of these girls, because they were in constant communication. Numerous phone records show that they were communicating. So all this, so you see the evidence there that the court just left it, the court just covered it up, and see it, and did nothing. So it was highly protected by the government of the country at that time. By Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, it was protected, it was being overseen. So the Liberian people, or the men, couldn't do nothing to answer that question. The men couldn't do nothing because you can't even fight the government.
Okay, so actually, before we go to the last subject, which Dwayne's going to introduce, I just want to say briefly, because I forgot to mention this along with the Ghana right to a vote policy. If you haven't seen already, FAL has taken a back to Africa position. We're calling it back to New Africa, the idea that Africans in America, if you do wish to go back to the motherland and you have realized that the prospects of living happily here are not that great, we have a whole video on it. It's the previous video to this one that I did. But basically, we are teamed with Kinshi, this organization in Tanzania, and the founder is looking to recruit African Americans who wish to resettle in Tanzania. And they're actually having a festival in October next year. It's for 2 weeks. And they're looking for FAL members who would be willing to actually go and visit Tanzania while they're having this festival to celebrate the return of African Americans to the continent. So if you want more information on that, you can watch the video. You can also link up with us by sending us an email on Federation of African Liberation at gmail.com. And the other thing I want to mention is that I've talked about our Liberation Library. Our Minister of Information, Dwayne Omawale, he did a digital library where we have a lot of text available for anyone who wants to read Pan-Africanist literature anywhere throughout the diaspora. So we're going to have the link. We're eventually going to put it on our website. But in the meantime, if you want the link to the library in the immediate future, just send us an email at federationofafricanliberation@gmail.com, and hopefully you can spread the information inside of your circles and make sure that we're all well-versed in Pan-Africanist issues, Pan-Africanist literature, so that we can arm ourselves for this future. So, Dwayne, you have a situation you want to talk about in regard to, I believe, Barbuda?
Barbados, actually.
Oh, Barbados, sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, what happened there was Alexander Nix, who was the former chief executive of Cambridge Analytica. There was a situation recently where what happened was he worked with an organization, let me find the name here, called FAL Elections, and what they did was they helped with election campaigns throughout the Caribbean. But what was leaked recently was that he had contacted the Barbados Labour Party, which is, you know, the party Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. His organization contacted them to assist with the elections, and they were rejected by this political party. And in the email correspondence, what happened was this guy, Alexander Nix, he referred to Mottley, who, as I said, is the current Prime Minister of Barbados, although she wasn't Prime Minister at the time. He referred to her and other people in her political party as, you know, the N-word. So what I found interesting about the situation is that this is an organization that's in the Caribbean helping political parties in the Caribbean, you know, with election campaigns. So again, this is another example of African people. We allow foreigners to come into our country and to exercise, you know, these positions of influence, you know, influence in our politics, and we find out in these leaked emails that, you know, this is what these people think of us. You know, the classic situation of, yeah, white people won't use the N-word, you know, in public now, but they say it in private when, you know, we're not around or through emails. So this is another example of, as African people, we have to be very cautious about which foreigners we allow into, you know, our societies and what positions we allow these foreigners to have, because I said these were people that were in the Caribbean to assist with election campaigns. So they were in a very influential position.
You know, with that, although I did not agree with the policy, you know, I feel like African people have to have a similar attitude like Trump wanted to have when he was like, basically, we're going to have a moratorium on allowing people from outside Arab, he picked Arab countries or a country with Muslims, and it was basically a Muslim ban. Although that was obviously a backwards policy because there was no evidence that, number one, any of these people in these countries pose a threat. The African people, to me, have to have a similar attitude with all these different parties, these different organizations that are coming into our countries, whether you be in the Caribbean or whether you be on the continent. But to me, we have to have a moratorium on allowing people coming in until we actually take inventory of our own people, till we actually reorganize our governments, because our governments, you know, the issue with our governments is that they're set up in a way to allow for puppets to come in and be able to come in saying that they're serving the people, but actually serving outside entities. The governments are structured in such a way where foreigners can come in and they're supposed to be people who are to the aid of our governments or people who work with our governments, but these people are actually people that look down on us and people who look at us as the N-word. So to me personally, like, I really feel like we have to take a few years and say no one, just till we figure this thing out, because the level of just disrespect that we've gotten, even from people coming into our countries for saying opportunity or whatever, like, I was just so disgusted with some of the behavior that some Chinese minors have shown whenever they go into African countries. Some of them having, I've seen a video where there's a Chinese restaurant, I believe it was, I forget the country the restaurant was in. It might have been Zambia, honestly, I'm not sure. But the restaurant had a policy of no Africans in our restaurant after 5 p.m.
That was Kenya.
Oh, it's Kenya. Okay. So it's in Kenya, no Africans in a restaurant after 5 p.m. So how do you come to our country and you don't even have respect for us? And why are we allowing this? That's honestly my opinion. Like, when it comes to situations with what happened in Barbados, there has to be a moment where we're saying, you know, no more interaction with these outsiders who, until we figure things out, until we actually figure out what mutually beneficial actually means, because right now, what we think is mutually beneficial is almost never mutually beneficial. It's always beneficial to one government over us. Any other comments on that?
Yeah, I'll add something quick about you mentioned Trump's policy. What I found interesting was Somalia was one of those countries that they want to ban Muslims from coming from. But it's funny because America's always been more of a threat to Somalia than the other way around in terms of, you know, how many times has Somalia invaded America or sent drones to conduct drone strikes in America? How often that's been done to Somalia. So, you know, it's interesting the game that, you know, the American media and, you know, certain politicians play, that they'll promote this image of Somalians being so dangerous to the United States, when really the United States is a bigger danger to Somalia and many of these other Muslim countries than the other way around.
Okay, so it looks like no one else has any comments. We did have a question. It looks like it's alluding to our previous topic. Why go to Africa when you don't have a military to protect you? Ghanaians are targeting Nigerians, businesses left and right over there. Well, that's why our platform is not just go back to Africa, but go back to New Africa, because we're saying that we're working constantly towards the liberation of Africa, and we're also going there to take part in the liberation of Africa. We have to all accept that Africa, the way that it is structured today and what it looks like as far as the power dynamics, is completely unacceptable for African people, because it is the richest continent in the world, yet the people aren't benefiting from the riches of their own land. So when we say we're going back with the intention of being able to build a military, being able to build up our own economies, being able to be self-reliant, being able to restructure the government in a way that will actually collectively benefit the people. So just remember, it's not just we're saying, let's all pack our bags up and join in what's going on over there. We're not saying that. We're saying that we have to acknowledge that what's going on with Africa is fundamentally wrong. And so we have to work on making an Africa that is something that benefits all of our people collectively, that we can actually go back to and not have to still be inside of a white supremacist system. Because as you all know, I laugh when people say, oh, well, you know, you want to go back to Africa so bad, go ahead now. Like, if I go now versus America, am I going to be any less subjected to white supremacy? The answer is no, even though it's a black politician who's the one that's posing as the government or the power official. We know behind that black politician is always a white person that's paying them, a white corporation or a white government that's paying this politician. So you can't escape white supremacy by going back to Africa. But what you can do is actively work on the liberation of Africa for wherever part of the diaspora that you are in. So do we have any last thoughts before we close out? Okay, looks like we're done. So thank you all for watching this broadcast. Like I said, we're going to always try to do this hopefully every 2 weeks. And so you'll see us again. If you have any topics that you think we should cover, that we should consider, feel free to email them to federationafricanliberation@gmail.com. And we will see you all in the next video.